Thank you for that introduction, Ken, and thank you for explaining that I'm not the other Richard Reeves, the famous historian. I've discovered that most of the time when I'm invited to speak at a conference, people think I am the other Richard Reeves, and so always somewhat disappointed to discover that it's me instead. So I'm becoming more of an expert on Nixon, Kennedy, and Tocqueville in order to be able to fill in for him. What you're going to hear will be entirely biased because Bell and Ron are the reason that I'm here today. About 3 years ago, showing true American open-mindedness, they took me under their wings at Brookings, despite the fact that at the time I didn't have a green card, and given that this was Brookings, even more shockingly, didn't even have a PhD. You'd be pleased to know that I've dealt with both of those embarrassing shortcomings since. Bell and Ron have forged a powerful and unique intellectual partnership at Brookings, founding and then elevating the Center on Children and Families and producing world-class work on families, poverty, opportunity, evidence, parenting, work, education, and plenty more besides. And much has been made recently, in particular in the context of this prize, of their bipartisanship, given that they have different political backgrounds and that they work with people across the political spectrum. So I've been thinking a little bit about the skills and attributes that they have which have allowed them to work in this bipartisan way. I've come up with 5, at least to get us started. The first is a deep respect for the views of others, regardless of their political background or their position. Secondly, a reverence for the evidence and for the facts. Thirdly, a willingness to adapt their views to the facts and not the other way around, as is so common, perhaps particularly in this town. We're always promised that we'll have evidence-based policy making, but all too often what we receive is policy-based evidence-making, but not from our prize winners today. And it hasn't made for an easy life for either of them. I suspect that Bell's life would have been easier if she had not accepted the evidence for the deleterious effects of single parenthood for the outcomes of children. I'm pretty sure Ron's life would have been easier if he had not accepted the evidence that most marriage promotion policies had simply failed to work. But neither of them are clearly here for an easy life. Fourth, a desire to work hard, to bring their ideas to bear on public policy, and boy, do they work hard. It may be that US productivity is not doing very well, but I can assure you it's not their fault. I would call their work ethics Stakhanovite, except I suspect they wouldn't appreciate the Soviet comparison. And fifth, and not least, an insatiable intellectual curiosity, which means that they're always pursuing new ideas and new avenues of research. They both, of course, have new books out, which you're going to hear about. But when you think about these attributes I've just listed, they're actually the ones that every scholar should aspire to, and perhaps every politician who aspires to be a statesman and too. So what Bell and Ron have shown us is that it turns out the skills required for bipartisanship are in fact the very same skills that are required for good scholarship. But being bipartisan does not mean being soft, by the way. Neither Bell or Ron would fit the description of being soft. Ron, as some of you will know, is a former US Marine. Bell is somebody who I think it would be fair to say holds people to a high standard and expects them to produce their very best work, and as a result tends to. And I'll share a vignette with you which illustrates that point. I was a member of the group that produced a report on poverty and opportunity that was jointly produced by Brookings and the AEI, and I should say that the working group and the report are a testament to Ron, to his leadership, and to his scholarship, and to his collegiality. Bell addressed the group and urged the group to take more seriously the evidence that we should be working harder on the issue of contraception, and in particular, more accessibility to the most effective forms of contraception, long-acting contraception, which I know Bell's going to talk about in a moment. And I agree with Bell about that, as I think does Ron. But it was a controversial issue on the group. And I later entered into an argument with one of the conservative members of the group who was deeply opposed to the use of these forms of contraception on the basis of his deeply held religious convictions. In the course of the argument, this was in a breakout session, we're standing up, our voices are raised, and he says, "You don't understand, Richard. Once I've signed this report, I have to face my God." And I said, "But you don't understand. When I sign this report, I have to face Isabel Sawhill. And who do you think is scarier?" I'm not going to tell you who it was. When Bell or Ron speak, it's a pretty good idea to listen. When Bell and Ron speak at the same event as they are today, it's both a great pleasure, and I would say that it's virtually a public duty. And so please join me, ladies and gentlemen, in welcoming the joint winners of the 2016 Patrick Moynihan Prize, Doctors Ron Haskins and Isabel Sawhill. Thank you.
Richard, thank you ever so much. That was very generous, and it has been a great pleasure to have you as a colleague. And Richard, for those of you who don't know, is a total inspiration to me and the other members of our team, and he is playing a leadership role now in our work, and we're just, both Ron and I are very, very pleased about that. I want to, of course, thank the Academy for this award. It is just simply mind-blowing to me that I should have been lucky enough, along with Ron, to receive the prize. And I think there are two reasons why I'm particularly pleased. One is because it is joint with Ron, and the other is because it is in the memory of Senator Moynihan. With respect to Ron, he and I have been working together for, I think it's about 15 years now. And that's a long time. And you can imagine that over 15 years, things happen, and there are tensions, and there are victories, and there are disappointments, and we have always worked, I think, happily and constructively together. I may embarrass Ron a little bit later on by saying more about that, but since I only have 15 minutes now, and I know some of you came to hear about substance, I'm going to defer. I also have great respect for Senator Moynihan. He and I served together on the advisory board of a little magazine called The Public Interest, now sadly defunct. And I think he had a large presence and a towering intellect. He was both a scholar and a politician, and managed to be successful in both roles. I'd say his brand of public service is very much being missed in today's political world. I also want to thank all of you for being here, and I think that one of the things Ron and I have most appreciated is the many notes and calls we've gotten from our friends and colleagues, and that means a lot to us because we've worked with so many of you. And I also want to thank my family. There's a whole row of them that are here today, and some of them have come from very far away. And the older I get, the more I appreciate that what really matters in life is your family, your friends, and your colleagues. So, going back to Senator Moynihan, I think many of you will remember that the good senator back in the 1960s wrote a report on black family life in the United States that got a lot of attention at the time and was extremely controversial. In retrospect, I think he was mostly right, but he was certainly ahead of his time. In my remarks today, I want to return to the topic, the same topic he addressed, the American family and what's been happening to it, except that I want to not talk just about black families. I want to talk about white families as well. And I'm going to use a few slides for that purpose, and they are from or based on my book. There's the title of it up on the first screen. And I will try to stay within my time here, and Emily is going to watch me to make sure, okay. I think that the first thing that we need to be reminded of is how much marriage is in retreat. Bear in mind that right now, 40% of all children in America are born outside of marriage. That's higher amongst African Americans, it's much lower amongst the well-educated, but it's no longer an issue that just affects a small group of people. If we take just the millennial generation, women under 30, half of all babies in America are now born outside of marriage. And so this is not just a problem that's confined to a small segment of society any longer, and it is certainly not just confined to communities of color. So what is driving this decline in marriage and rise in out-of-wedlock childbearing? Well, there are a lot of factors that have been noted in the literature. I think these are three that get mentioned a lot and are all important. I think the most fundamental probably is the improving status of women, because it means that women and children are no longer totally dependent on marriage for economic reasons. They may still get married in the future, but I think less and less it will be for economic reasons and more for other reasons. I don't want in any way to minimize the importance of the declining economic prospects of men, especially less educated men, but my reading of the evidence is that it's not the primary factor. I would give lots of attention to what's happened to social norms. I mean, they have changed dramatically. I could go through a lot of boring data with you, but let me make the point by reminding you about how our language has changed. When I was young, we referred to a baby born outside of marriage as an illegitimate child. That is no longer a term that is acceptable. We talked about two people who were cohabiting, and there is a lot more cohabitation, as two people living in sin. And we talked about a woman who had sex before marriage as being loose or worse. So social norms have changed a lot, and I think that that's driving these changes as well. So why does all of this matter? Richard already mentioned the fact that I have accepted, but I don't think I'm the only one that's accepted. I think virtually the entire research community who studies these issues. I see Andy Cherlin here. He's been one of the best, and our colleague Sarah McClanahan at Princeton, Brad Wilcox, many others I could mention, have shown with detailed research and trying to carefully control for everything you possibly can control for, that children, on average, who grow up in single-parent families don't do as well on a lot of outcomes as do their married parent counterparts. I think the other thing that I argue in my book, and that all of us have done some work on, is that the breakdown of the family, this growth in childbearing outside of marriage and more single-parent families, have had impacts on poverty, on inequality, and on social mobility. And if we have time, I can get into all of that, but I'll just assert it for now. I immediately want to acknowledge that there's a chicken and an egg problem here. The decline in the family, the growth of single parents who are 4 or 5 times as likely to be poor as married parents, that's driving the poverty rate up. But more poverty is also leading to or contributing to the decline in the family. And the growth of single parents. So I don't think we can totally sort this out. I think it's some of both. And I think that too much arguing about, well, one is 1/3 and one is 2/3 and so forth is not going to get us very far. They're intertwined and we need to work on both. So what should we do about this? The Academy, and this is what I like so much about the Academy, is very interested in connecting research to policy. So, we could write all the books and papers we want about the problem, but we still have to think about what to do. So there's sort of two visions out there now. One is a more conservative vision that says, let's bring back marriage. And the other is a more progressive vision that says, single parents are here to stay, there's nothing wrong with them, we should give them they and their children, a lot more assistance. I think both sides are right up to a point, but we do have to ask, which can we make the most headway on? And as Richard again alluded to, we don't have a lot of evidence right now that marriage programs or governmental efforts to bring back marriage have had much success. Ron may want to say more about this. He and I have slightly different views on this, but I don't think diametrically different, and it's worth a debate. The liberal solution of providing more assistance has its place too. But I think that it's going to get very expensive if we have more and more single parents and they continue to have economic problems, and it's costing the American taxpayer more and more to support them. And I think it's going to take a long time to get poverty rates down to what we would like them to be. We've been working on this, after all, since the 1960s. We spent quite a lot of money, and we haven't made huge progress. I like to tell people the presumably apocryphal story about a guy who's standing next to a river, and there's a bunch of kids floating down the river, and they're at risk of drowning, and he's trying to pull them out of the river to save them. And then he discovers there's another guy upstream who's throwing the kids in the river as fast as he can pull them out. And so I think we have this tug of war between our changing demographics, which are leading to more poverty through changes in family structure, and our social programs, which may not be totally adequate, but have been growing as well. And when I do my calculations, I find that the two are in some kind of rough balance. And therefore, this story about the guy by the river, to me, is a metaphor of a sort of what we face as a society. And so that's really, to me, a dilemma, and means we should be working not just on marriage and not just on social programs, but also on these changes in the family. So in my book, I suggest a third kind of solution, which I call changing drifters into planners. And I think this will actually greatly enhance the success of the other two approaches. So I'm not arguing that we only do one thing, I'm just arguing that this particular approach hasn't gotten enough attention, and I'm now going to try to tell you why I think we need to spend more time focusing on it. So, what do I mean by drifting into parenthood? Well, I mean that people are having unplanned pregnancies, and many of those pregnancies, some of them are terminated by an abortion, but many of these young couples go on to have the baby. And the final statistic that I want you to take away here is that the majority, 60%, of these births to single women under the age of 30 are, according to the women themselves, based on a sample of 20,000 collected by the government, these women say they did not intend to have these children, or at least they didn't intend to have them at this particular time. They came too soon, typically. When we look at how these rates differ by education or by income or by race and ethnicity, you can see a very clear pattern that the more disadvantaged you are, the more likely it is that you're not happy and didn't plan to have the children that you have when you had them. Now, why so much drifting? Lots of reasons, but I want to focus on the fact that people are often not using contraception at all, and when they are, they're using it inconsistently, and they're not using the best forms. And we can actually change the default. This comes from behavioral economics. By giving women long-acting reversible contraception, which means IUDs and implants, which once you have them, you're not going to get pregnant. Your default is going to be you will not get pregnant until you yourself make a conscious decision to go back to your health provider and say, I want to have a baby now, please remove the IUD. So this is a chart that I sent earlier to the New York Times, and they went bananas over it. So I like to show it. And I'm also running out of time here, but basically it's showing you that if you and your partner are using a condom or the birth control pill, which is what most people in their 20s do, at the end of 5 years of sexual activity, your pregnancy rate, your chance of getting pregnant is going to be 63% if you're using condoms, 38% if you're using the pill, very, very low if you're using one of these long-acting forms. Now, do we have any evidence that any of this would work in the real world? And I'm going to say we have lots of evidence. Here are 5 pieces of evidence, no results for Delaware yet, but from the other 4 studies. I don't have time to go through them. I have a slide on every single one of them with numbers and sample sizes and all that kind of thing. One of them is a randomized controlled trial. The other 4 are not. And you'll just have to take my word for it that they worked. There's all those other slides. So the utilization rate of LARCs has been going up from 2% about 5 years ago to 12% now, but still very low. And the barriers to greater use are, I think, these 4. A lot of women don't even know about them. I'm including educated women even. Providers aren't trained and often won't provide them. There is a high upfront cost, partially remedied by the Affordable Care Act, and there's been political opposition, which we can discuss later if you're interested. So this is my last slide. I just want to kind of tie the bow on the package here and say, what's the way forward? And in my view, the way forward is, first of all, we do need a change in social norms. The old norm, which was very strong, I can remember it when I was young, and I'm sure my sister can remember this, because was you do not have a child outside of marriage. It was stigmatized. And that's gone away, for the most part. And the new norm, I think, that we need to build toward is don't have a child until you want to be a parent. And if we could empower young adults to align their fertility with their own desires in this area, we could achieve a lot. And we now have the technological or medical means to do that through these long-acting forms of contraception. Now, I want to stress that we should combine all of that with effective social programs, because if people don't have a sense of opportunity, they don't have a sense of their own future, they won't be motivated to defer childbearing. So I don't want to leave that out of the equation, and I could give another half an hour lecture on how we create an opportunity society, which was the title of Ron's and my last book before our most recent ones. And many of our recommendations were adopted by the Obama administration, although with limited ability to be enacted. So with that, I will stop and turn this over to Ron.
When I found out that Richard Reeves was going to introduce us, I went into his office. I said, Richard, you know something I really don't like? And of course he said, no, what? And I said, I hate it. When the introduction is much better than the talk. I especially hate it when I'm the talker. So be prepared. I want to join Bell in thanking all the people who came. We have wonderful friends that are here. I think I've been in this field for over 40 years, almost half a century, in fact. And one of the most positive things about all those years in this field has been the notes, and Bill and I got more or less the same notes. They were just overwhelming. They were really, some of them brought tears to my eyes. They were so nice about how glad they were that we won this award and so forth. It was just wonderful. And many of the people who wrote those notes are here, and the rest of you who didn't write a note, I'll give you my email address right afterwards. I plan to have them all on the wall in some kind of fancy way. And of course, I'm going to save my remarks about Bell for tonight. I think they'll be much more appropriate and well received after everybody's had a couple of glasses of wine, including Bell. I'll be on the edge with that one. And of course, my thanks to the Academy and those who supported our nomination for the Moynihan Prize. I consider this award the greatest honor a scholar and policy maven like myself can receive, especially because of the great American for which it is named. Senator Moynihan was the greatest politician among social scientists in the nation's history, as well as the greatest social scientist among politicians in the nation's history. Here is evidence to support his political greatness. In 1988, he was reelected to the United States Senate from New York by 2,172,865 votes, the largest margin of victory for a legislative seat ever until that time. Here's evidence supporting his greatness as a social scientist. In 1965, from his somewhat modest position in the Department of Labor, Moynihan used his gifts as a social scientist to address what he considered to be the most important domestic issue of his time, the demise of the married couple family among Black Americans. According to Moynihan, the most important outcome of the rise of female-headed families in the Black community was that father-absent homes provide an inadequate rearing environment for boys and young men. Boys and young men need a father. Never mind the carping, distortions, and political correctness that Moynihan had to endure for supposedly blaming the victim. The consequences of being socialized without male influence for young men and for the nation are severe, today and then. Arrested development, violence, even chaos in the inner city. You think I'm exaggerating? Here are Moynihan's exact words in an article he wrote the same year that his report was leaked to the public. A community that allows a large number of young men to grow up in broken families, dominated by women, never acquiring any stable relationship to male authority, never acquiring any set of rational expectations about the future. That community asks for and gets chaos, crime, violence, arrest, disorder, most particularly the furious, unrestrained lashing out at the whole social structure. That is not only to be expected, it is very near to inevitable, and it is well deserved. His Department of Labor report laying out this problem and the other problems caused by single mothering contains 64 figures and tables. His argument about the demise of the Black family and what the nation should do about it, in other words, was based on careful analysis of available evidence. More impressive still, his conclusions have been largely confirmed by subsequent social science studies, as shown so clearly in the volume on the Moynihan Report released in the Annals of the American Academy of Political and Social Science in 2009, in recent work by Raj Chetty and his colleagues, as well as the outstanding literature review on the development of black boys, suggestively entitled Wayward Sons by David Autor and Melanie Wasserman. Here's another facet of Moynihan's unquenchable appetite for evidence. I was once attending a meeting with researchers in the Russell Senate Office Building, the very building we're in now, at which Moynihan had been invited to speak. During the course of the talk, he asked if anyone in the audience knew Peter Rossi's iron law of program evaluation. Many of you will recall that in 1987, Rossi wrote that the expected value of any net impact assessment of any large-scale social program is 0. Most Democrats would be unlikely to mention this law because of its implications that most government social programs that have been evaluated don't work. Yet on that day, Moynihan brought up the law specifically to argue that many, if not most, social programs don't work and something has to be done about it. According to Rossi himself, Moynihan frequently badgered federal officials about Rossi's iron law and its implications for their programs. For his part, despite Moynihan's strong desire to spend government dollars on effective social programs, his commitment to the evidence on their effectiveness far outweighed his instinct as a Democrat to protect them. In accord with his own famous dictum, he was entitled to his own opinions, but not to his own facts. Again, as in the case of the black family, we see Moynihan here as in his role as a seer. One of the prime motivating factors of the current evidence-based movement is the understanding, now widespread, that most social programs either have not been well evaluated or they don't work. Perhaps the most important social function of social science is to find and test programs that will reduce the nation's social problems. The exploding movement of evidence-based policy and the many roots the movement is now planting offer the best chance of fulfilling this vital mission of social science, of achieving, in other words, exactly the outcomes Moynihan had hoped for. Today, evidence-based policy rests on the mighty oak of program evaluation in general and the random assignment study in particular. Anyone familiar with the ways of Washington politics knows that evidence about whether a given program produces impacts or meets a benefit cost test usually does not enjoy a privileged place at the policy negotiation tables in this city. That may be slowly changing now, but take it from someone who spent 14 years as a staffer on the Ways and Means Committee and a year in the White House. The Congress is a long way from insisting that evidence of program impacts be a major consideration in decisions about how to spend tax dollars on social programs. Even so, there are many reasons to be optimistic about the growing stature of evidence-based policy. I turn now to a very brief update on the strong and growing movement that has the potential to bring the evidence of program evaluation to bear on policy choice in the nation's capital and in state capitals around the nation, and thereby simultaneously fulfill the promise of social policy and the vision of Senator Moynihan. So here is my entry into the evidence-based policy sweepstakes. This set of initiatives, tools, and institutions hold the potential for placing the nation's social policy on a solid foundation of programs that have been shown by rigorous evidence to produce their intended outcomes and to help the nation solve its greatest social problems like education, employment, training, teen pregnancy, poverty, and so forth, and many others as well. I'm sure people in this audience could supplement this list, but it meets my purpose of showing the scope and magnitude of the movement that is now expanding rapidly and holds such promise. A word about each of these. The first one is development, test, and effective programs. I've already talked about that several times. That is the foundation of evidence-based movement, is to find programs, to develop them, and test them to show that they work, and then to use them as frequently as possible, and to get rid of lousy programs and replace them with ones that have been shown to work. The randomized controlled trial, or RCT, is the best test, but not the only one, by which we can establish these programs and be sure that they will produce the impacts that are intended. And as a nation, we are extremely fortunate that we have several, both private and public, and also profit and for-profit and non-profit organizations that are extremely capable in conducting RCTs. If you have a question about a social program and you want to test it, they will figure out a way to do it, to have 1,000 subjects, to do it in 5 different cities, and they'll recruit the people, randomly assign them in effective ways, and do great data analysis, and you will have an answer at the end about whether the program works or not. We're very fortunate in that respect. It's a big part of the foundation of evidence-based policy. Also, the establishment of the Institute of Education Sciences in 2002 was an extremely important moment. It took the vast wasteland of educational research and in a short time since then has converted it to a field full of large random assignment studies. We've learned a tremendous amount. They have a wonderful website that you can see what they've learned and learn a lot about programs that actually do have impacts. We also have clearinghouses. I know of 8 clearinghouses of social issues that have information about these programs that have been shown to work, as well as the programs that have been shown not to work. And anybody who's interested, a program director out living in South Dakota, could look at these websites and find out information about a program and decide if that's the kind of program that they would like to implement. I would like to spend more time talking about the Obama evidence-based initiatives. I wrote a book about it called Show Me the Evidence. These are 6 initiatives. There are over 1,400 programs around the country. The reason that this initiative is so important to me is because it carries the culture of evidence throughout the country. And we now have 1,400 programs that are learning. You have to evaluate. You have to use good designs. And to some extent, your funding is contingent on those evaluations. We're right now in the midst of getting reports. We're about to get a big batch of them from the Teen Pregnancy Prevention Program. In about 1.5 years, we'll get results from home visiting, which I think is an extremely important intervention. We're going to learn a lot about it, both at a national level and at individual programs and various model programs that are good home visiting programs. So this has been an extremely valuable addition. It needs to keep going. One of the programs has already been killed by a Republican Congress. Hopefully the rest will survive. OMB has been the quarterback of this movement in the Obama administration and before the Obama administration. There actually were roots in the Bush administration. So OMB is an extremely important influence here. It's already produced lots of individuals that many of us in this room know that have gone on to do other things related to evidence-based policy. Our hope is that that will continue in the next administration, whoever the female president might be. The next important point is the nudge unit in the White House. What a magnificent thing that is. They were only in existence for a little more than a year. They published a report in December of 17 random assignment studies based on the principles of behavioral economics. And almost all of them random assignment. Almost all of them showed significant impacts on crucial issues, such as, can you train bureaucrats in the Department of Agriculture to use 2-sided copying rather than 1? So this is a way to improve government efficiency and save a lot of money. The growth of pay-for-success programs in which someone invests money, usually not the government, and the money is used to conduct an intervention. It has a very high-quality evaluation, and if it doesn't produce an impact, the investor loses their money, just like buying lousy stock. And there are 35 of these now in the United States. The Congress is extremely impressed. There are now at least 2 large pieces of legislation that expanded pay for success and involved the federal government. Many states are considering the same thing, so pay for success is another great addition to the evidence-based movement. The Results First initiative by Pew and MacArthur is truly a thing of beauty. What they are doing is trying to carry this message to the states. 21 states have signed up. They are reviewing a particular area of social programs, and if they're not working, they're trying to replace them with things that work better. That is why Pew paid to have those 8 clearinghouses I mentioned, all brought together in one clearinghouse so the states can look and see what similar programs are and what the evidence is that they work and whether that might work in their state. And of course, they're picking up the tab for the whole thing. The Ryan Murray Commission on Evidence-Based Policy, nothing bipartisan happens in Washington. Well, this did. It was recently passed. I say within 2 months that the commission will be appointed, and they will make all kinds of recommendations about how the government can do a better job, both state and federal, I hope, on basing their policies on evidence. But above all, they will review federal databases and discuss ways that those can be used to evaluate programs. The use of administrative data is a crucial part of this movement, and I think this commission can do a lot to promote the use of administrative data. Financial support from the government and foundations is crucial. We're getting that. It's growing. Foundations especially have been distinguished. Casey, Arnold, I mentioned Pew and MacArthur, and several other foundations have come forth and put up money, and hopefully they'll continue to do it. And finally, support for evidence-based policy. In the next administration, Arnold has already given a grant to a coalition of think tanks to try to figure out ways to do that and write papers and actually meet with people in new administration when we know what that administration is going to be. I want to give a brief update on Rossi's Iron Law because I do not want to leave with the impression that the expected impact of a social program is now zero. It is not zero. We have a whole list of social programs that produce, some cases, spectacular outcomes, and if we would use those more often, we would really be able to attack our national problems. This is just a list that I made up. You could get to probably 50 or even 80 of these programs, and hopefully they're going to grow and grow and grow, and every year we will have new social programs that have been shown by random assignment studies to work. And now I just want to close by making it clear that I am not a foolhardy and a cockeyed optimist. There are problems here. There are still great challenges, the greatest of which, of course, is that policymakers don't necessarily like to listen to evidence. They'd rather win the next election. That's a shocking insight. I've been in Washington a long time. It's come. I know these things. But here are some issues. I don't want to talk about all these because I probably bored you enough already. But I want to just signal two of these that I think are very important, and that is, first of all, we know far too little about implementation. The greatest model in the world will not work if it's poorly implemented, if it has poor teachers, if the parents are not involved, if you don't have good curriculum and so forth. Every program has its own important characteristics. And then the big question that we're starting to answer now because of the Obama initiatives, this could be one of its most fundamental contributions. What do we do when a program fails? I can assure you that if you defund programs the moment they fail, that is a losing strategy. You have to work with the programs, and they have to try to use the evidence to improve the programs, new teacher training, coaching, a better relationship with parents, new curriculum. There are probably 100 different ways, and not all of them will work in the same places. So this is an extremely important part. I hope that you see that we really are in the middle of something here that is very big, and that we have a chance of strengthening social policy by using the evidence to program impact. As Gordon Berlin said in congressional testimony earlier this week, we have a solid start on building better programs, more effective policies, and more responsible use of taxpayer dollars. And I would add, of truly fulfilling the social function of social science and Senator Moynihan's vision. Thank you.